welcome back for another weekly episode of CEO and the Lobster. And this week we're going to talk, as always, topical crypto news is a favorite for us to chat about here, bringing you guys up to speed with what's happening and our take on things in the industry. So this week, the Bitcoin $1 million bet. Patrick, give us a bit of a background on that.
Yeah, so this is between two reasonably vocal individuals in the space, James Medlock and a venture capitalist called Barley G. And essentially, Barley G is the former CTO of Coinbase, is a general partner at Andrew Horowitz, I'm probably not saying that right, and has said that made essentially this bet, 40 to 1 odds, that one Bitcoin, which is currently worth about 26 million bucks, is in 90 days
26 million?
Oh, $26,000 at the moment. Yes,
That's
very
upping
good.
the ante a little.
Yeah. Will be worth more than $1 million USD in 90 days' time. And essentially how they're doing this is both of them agreed to give each other something at the end of these 90 days. The venture capitalist is going to give $1 million, and then James Medlock is going to send over one Bitcoin. Depending on which one's worth more, they'll win or lose. And it's a really kind of interesting, situation that people have kind of been watching quite closely. Yeah.
So why are they doing this? And do you really think that Barley G believes that Bitcoin will 40x in price over less than 3 months' time?
So I think at the core of this, they disagree about hyperinflation, if that kind of makes sense. James is a skeptic. Balaji believes that the Fed's going to engage in quantitative easing, and that's going to lead to hyperinflation. This is a really big call, but it's also like a bet they'll either pay off a little or pay off a lot. So
And
it'll be really...
we've had talk about hyperinflation for quite some time, right? Like we had Jack Dorsey from back when he was at Twitter was tweeting about hyperinflation. We saw all the quantitative easing during COVID time. It hasn't come into being yet, but is that something that's still on the horizon and still a real potential?
Yeah, definitely. So it's actually interesting that you mentioned Jack with it. He was one of the people that's all of this has of course happened on crypto Twitter because of course it has. And Jack was actually one of the people involved on both sides, both parties trying to call him out, get him to pick one side or the other. Yeah, it's really interesting because essentially it's like showing this like trade-off, well, not trade-off, but this competition that we've seen recently between the traditional finance system and the crypto finance system and that loggerheads, and like people are just getting to the point where they think big things are going to happen kind of between them. And yeah, to touch on that hyperinflation point, that's kind of why this is such an extreme bet. Like if he's right, okay, cool, but hyperinflation actually is really bad for a lot of people. Like good on him for winning this bet, but there's actually like going to be a lot of reasons why he didn't. So I guess my question to you is, why do some people think that Bitcoin's kind of a deflationary hedge against kind of hyperinflation? Why is that? Yeah, I don't know, I'd just be interested to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, so the Bitcoin, this has been a really interesting debate that's been held in the Bitcoin ecosystem for, since day dot really, is this idea of Bitcoin as a hedge against inflation or a deflationary asset. So the reason why people make that claim is that Bitcoin has a fixed supply. There's only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoin in circulation. At current state, I think we've had around 19 million of those Bitcoin created, issued, or mined, as it's called, and sort of put out into circulation. And over time, the amount of Bitcoin that gets put out reduces. So you have, Bitcoin as an asset that has a fixed cap. It won't be more than 21 million versus fiat currencies, which we can and do see governments printing a lot more of these. And like we talked about before, there was a lot of printing of money over COVID that happened in America and New Zealand, Australia, most countries around the world. We're seeing potentially more of that. And there's a bit of debate at the moment as to whether what the Fed has done around the bank insurance deposit schemes is another form of quantitative easing or not. That has added a massive amount of debt to the balance sheet, but that's a whole other story. But yeah, so if these governments can continue to print more money, then your US dollar, your New Zealand dollar, your Australian dollar becomes worth less over time. Conversely, if the Bitcoin that you hold can't get diluted by more and more Bitcoin being issued, then the theory is that that will go up in value. So again, this is a theory. It needs to be sort of seen how that goes through different market cycles, but there's definitely some renewed interest and debate in this at the moment. And definitely, some people are putting forward the current movement of Bitcoin. We're seeing it up, what is it, 10% this week, 40% since the start of the year. And there's a lot of talk about that being proof of this inflationary or deflationary aspect of Bitcoin.
Good. I guess just one thing that was kind of touching on is the concept that I've heard thrown around a lot is this idea of the halving, and that kind of being one of the main justifications why people think that Bitcoin is deflationary. So what is it? When does it kind of happen? And yeah, what is the expected impacts of that?
Yeah, so the halving's a really interesting characteristic of Bitcoin. And, I talked before about we've got, 19 million or whatever Bitcoin in existence, and a little bit more Bitcoin is entering the system every day. The way that that happens is through mining. When new blocks are added to the blockchain, they're mined, and the miners receive Bitcoin as a reward for the effort that they do. Effectively, they are helping build the network and helping secure it. So that the Bitcoin they receive is a reward for that. Now, of course, for Bitcoin to have a limited cap, you can't just have this reward going ad infinitum and constantly pumping out new Bitcoin. It has to decline over time. And the way that the Bitcoin system was set up is that the block reward started at, every time you added a block, you got 50 Bitcoin. Then in, I think it was 2012, it halved to 25 Bitcoin, then it halved again, 2.5. And now we're seeing what will be the fourth Bitcoin halving, which will be coming up in probably around a year from now. So around March 2024, exact date TBC. So as the amount of Bitcoin entering the system halves, that adds to the deflationary pressure of Bitcoin. It's becoming a more and more scarce resource. There's less of it entering the ecosystem. And again, the theory behind that is that will drive price. And we've seen a lot of really interesting analysis around price movements with previous halvings. Again, I'll keep stressing, past performance is no indicator of future returns. And also, we've only been through 3 of these halvings. They've had very different macroeconomic conditions in each one. But there's sort of this body of work and analytics being sort of tuned over around what's happened on previous halvings and what that might mean if the same pattern is followed for the next one.
Yeah, so you mentioned May 2024. Okay, cool. That's a year away. Why are we talking about this now? Why is these people making $1 million bets for something that's a year off when it's over 90 days, right? They're fundamentally different timescales.
Yeah, I'm not actually sure if Balaji's bet is anything to do with the halving, because the 90 days, if you look at the graphs of previous halving price movements, we would expect to be in a bear run for probably the rest of this year and wouldn't start to see prices pick up until probably actually after the halving. So that might be, I think these are probably quite different things. There's a hyperinflation argument, which is leading to the $1 million bet, which, to be honest, I think is probably a publicity stunt more than anything else. And then there's the Bitcoin halving, which is more looking at those sort of fundamentals of the currency itself, what it's done in past, and that's quite separate from the macroeconomic environment. Have you sort of been looking into these halving price predictions yourself, Patrick, and have any view on if you think that cycle is still holding up? And, are you personally going to get involved in a bit of price speculation around the halving?
I won't tell people what I'm personally going to do because I don't want to see people to realize how bad I am at this. It seems that if you want the best indicator in the world, just do the opposite of whatever I do, it seems. In terms of this price soccer, yeah, it's actually a really, really interesting kind of concept because it's kind of this underlying relationship between the US dollar and Bitcoin. We kind of touched them perceived to be inflationary and deflationary, and there's just this going consensus, and it's one of those things in the market that if there's a going consensus, if enough people believe it, it kind of becomes true. But it's also some people are starting to doubt it. So the US dollar, well, not even the US dollar, most countries consider an inflation rate between 2 and 3% good for a long-term thing. It's considered a known entity. But then you've got this Bitcoin separate kind of things happening on the side, which is this halving, this getting closer and closer to the maximum amount of supply, the less Bitcoin entering these systems, which creates essentially just sharp points in the relationship between these two patterns. And those sharp points, those changes in that fundamental balancing act between them previously has been speculated to lead to price spikes. Those price spikes are kind of, yeah, separate to this hyperinflation argument, and that's why I think like there is so much interest in it now, is that people think it's going to be a big one because part of the underlying assumption is inflation's pretty stable. The US dollar side of the equation is pretty flat. It's the Bitcoin one that does the funky stuff. And if the other side of the equation stops being stable, and particularly there is that massive line of inflation there, then that might exacerbate the effect. And I think that's why people are kind of looking into it. No one knows what's going to happen, but the thought is that this next one is actually just going to be really, really interesting, because regardless of whether this previously observed effects hold or if they don't, either way, it's going to be a really, really interesting time in the market to see what's happening. This is just one of the hypotheses. Again, if I could tell the future, I wouldn't be working 9 to 5. Sorry, Janine. But honestly,
I'm glad that's a skill you haven't yet developed.
Yeah, but just as a spectator, I think it's going to be a really, really interesting time. And this is kind of the time, just to put out there, that people are putting theories out, that people are looking at to see what happens, because essentially, if anything interesting was going to happen, is when there's going to be big changes in those underlying assets. What that change is going to be, who knows, least of all me. But whatever it is, if you get it right, it's potentially a really, really, a really, really interesting time in space, time to be in this space, I'd say. That's kind of my main takeaways. What are your thoughts on that, Janine?
Yeah, I think this is probably something that we're going to be talking about a lot more over the next year, and seeing how that cycle perpetuates. In the meantime, though, this $1 million bet is quite an interesting one to watch. I would wager that Balaji is going to lose this bet, but I think he's probably going to win for the benefit he gets for his personal brand and yeah, the publicity out of this one. So fair play to him on that.
Agreed. No, I think, yeah, we'll be watching closely, and I'm sure we'll be talking about this in the future.
Cool.
Awesome.
All right, well, till next week. And as always, hit us up if you've got any topics you'd like us to cover or any suggestions on our format. Great to hear from you guys, and we'll see you again in a week.
Awesome. Thanks all. Appreciate it.